Welcome to Growthology. I am your host, Carlos Hidalgo, and I have with me today my good friend, longtime colleague, Carla Johnson. Carla, thank you for being our guest on Growthology. Really excited about the conversation.
Hey, thanks for having me, Carlos. And you forgot to mention former fellow Coloradoan.
Yes, yeah, and I'm the one who's former. You're still
You
there.
bet.
Yeah, I did bail. So, and if I moved back, I wouldn't go to or Denver. I think I'd go somewhere a little bit more remote.
I think
But
I would too.
still in the mountain. I mean, we call them mountains in the Adirondacks. What's kind of makes me laugh a little bit. I love the Adirondacks, my favorite place on earth, but they refer to the high peaks. I think the highest peak in the Adirondacks is like 5,200 feet.
Yeah.
Mount Marcy. Maybe I've got my measurements wrong, but I remember my house at Colorado was at like 7,300. So when
it's like
the high peaks here, it's a little bit different than what you're getting in the Rocky Mountains there in Colorado.
yeah, it's all relative, right? Like a lot of things. Yep.
Yeah, and it's just a different way of hiking too, because here, because you don't have the elevation, you're going straight up. There,
and you can breathe, while you're going straight up because you're not a mile high.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. Well, hey, before we get into everything innovation, I want to talk about your book. I want to talk about your area of expertise. If you weren't in a corporate role, and I know you're not in a corporate role, you have your own business, but if you weren't dealing with corporations in corporate America, what would you be doing?
I think I'd be back to our conversations about mountains and 14ers. I think I'd be leading treks or someplace around the world. Yeah. I think it's pretty amazing when people realize what they can do themselves physically and the emotional part that it takes and how you really have to look inside yourself and to be able to help people do that both physically, mentally, emotionally. I think that's what I do.
Oh, that would be so cool. When I was in my young 20s, it's kind of weird. I'm terrified of heights, but I was a rappelling instructor.
Wow.
And as long as I was tethered in and had control, maybe this speaks to my control tendencies, I felt fine. And you would get a kid on the side of this cliff freaking out and just be able to come up next to them and talk to them and be like, hey, it's going to be okay. You're not going anywhere. And see the joy on their face when they finally got to the bottom and they knew they just scaled what, 80 or 120 feet, however big that cliff was. It really was so much fun to be a part of that and help guide them that. So maybe there you go. Just
there you go. I think you see a lot about the stories people tell themselves about what they can and can't do.
Boy, that's so much of life, isn't it?
Right. Yep.
Lies we believe. So anyway, that's awesome. I will keep that in mind. If I win the Powerball, maybe I'll funnel some your way and invest.
I'd appreciate that. That'd be awesome, Carlos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but Carla, you and I met a long time ago at Content Marketing World. You were with our good friend Ardith when we first met, and you've kind of pivoted now for a while. You wrote this book, which I recommend to everybody, on rethink innovation, not rethink, but regarding think innovation. So what do you mean? Innovation is a word that you see, innovative company, innovative product. What do you mean when you talk about innovation and you use that word?
And it's such a good question, Carlos, because I think one of the things about innovation is that people love to make it complicated. Because if it's complicated, it's important. And if it's important and you talk about it, then you're important in an organization. And then you have important teams and then you have important departments and things like that. And so when I look at innovation, a lot of it is really about simplicity. And my definition is the ability to consistently come up with new, good, and reliable ideas. And it's a short definition, but each word is super important. So if you think of a new idea, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that has never, ever been done before. Like maybe it's just new in your industry. Like, for example, McDonald's took inspiration for how to design their drive-through from Formula One pit stop. So had those kind of designs and systems been done before? Yes, but it was new to the fast food restaurant kind of world. And then a great idea, to be honest, what I think is a great idea, you might not necessarily think it's a great idea. So it's a lot more subjective, but it's what advertising great David Ogilvy talks about. It kind of like makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up and it gets you excited and kind of makes you a little jealous that maybe you didn't think of it. So that kind of visceral feeling around it. But we've seen lots of new ideas. We've seen lots of great ideas, lots of new and great ideas that fizzled out pretty fast. And that's why this third element is so important, is the reliability of an idea. And that means that an idea has to have some sort of financial impact. Are you saving money? Are you generating revenue? Are you growing your organization? And then back to the word consistently, innovation is really about consistently being able to come up with ideas that have all three characteristics. Because when I did my research with the top performing and most prolific innovators, individuals, teams, and companies, that was a characteristic, that they're able to get that flywheel going and understand how to use these new, great, and reliable ideas to grow the business, to solve problems, to help customers, and to do all the things in fresh and different ways.
All right, so you have new, good, and reliable with
New,
consistency.
great, and reliable.
New, great, which is far different than good.
That's right.
Great and reliable. So you've known me long enough. My wife can attest. I have an idea a minute.
Oh, guilty.
Yeah,
Absolutely
like I
guilty.
will see something and go, I mean, even we moved up here to our little small town. I'm like, you know what this town needs? And my wife's like, no. Not that,
Whatever's coming next. So
yeah,
no.
not that she doesn't agree. She just doesn't want us to invest in it, right? So I can understand this process from a individual perspective, because I know for me it's a good idea when I can't shake it. Because a lot of my ideas, I voice it, and it's like, if you ask me the next day, I'd be like, oh yeah, what was that? But it's the ones that stick with me. That's where I go, okay, is this just me really perseverating on something, or is this really great? But how do you do that at a cultural level, at a corporate level, where so many times it's like you're robotic, you're given here's your badge, here's your job, here's your role, go do your work, clock in, clock out. I know I'm simplifying it, but how does that at a corporate level or at a cultural level, and even from bring it to a departmental level, like B2B marketing, right? It's how do you instill that in your people? Because I would imagine there's some risk and failure involved with that.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest hurdles is that fear of risk and failure. And you've wasted budget, you've wasted time, maybe you've wasted your job if you feel like you fail, your job's on the line. But I always say, if you want innovative thinking, organizations and cultures, then you have to reverse engineer it and teach people how to be innovative thinkers to start with. So in order to get an innovative culture, you have to have innovative teams, because it's really the performance of teams that elevate the performance of the organization. But if you want an innovative team, you have to have innovative individuals. And in order to have innovative individuals, you have to teach them the skills and mindsets of how to think like an innovator. Because if you ask most people, and I'd say a lot of B2B marketers, they're like, I'm not creative, I'm not innovative, that's not my thing. Like, that's the R&D department, that's the innovation department, like that's somebody else's job. But really 90% of innovation happens outside of those traditional innovation and R&D departments. So we have a 90% opportunity, which I think of as like low-hanging fruit across the organization. And we both come from the marketing and sales world, and especially with our connection with customers, we have this powerful, powerful opportunity to take the skills that we have and can learn as innovative thinkers and really flip the work that we do on its head. So that's the main part of what I do, Carlos, for my work now, is teach people the skills of how to become innovative thinkers. So now when they have a challenge or a deadline, or they need a campaign, or they need something for a customer that has to be new, fresh, and different, they change that habitual thinking. And instead of going back to doing what they've always done, they now take a different route and understand the thought process of how to get to a new idea that's better and get there faster.
So you're having to, kind of like we started the podcast on your Trek company of getting people to believe in themselves. You're having to, with individuals, undo a lot of the traditional corporate think that they may be indoctrinated in if they've been in maybe not with the company, but a role, say, for 10, 15, 20 years. So I'm not asking you to give away your secret sauce, but what are some of the hallmarks? What are some of the characteristics of someone that you can go, this person's an innovative thinker and can help lead that cultural change in an organization?
Well, the biggest thing that you see, and I share my framework, so I'm happy to share that, is that they can connect the dots really fast. So what irritates you from your wife's perspective, and part of it is because like you and I are people who connect the dots really fast, like so rapidly that it can be hard for us to explain what we thought to somebody else. And so when I started down this path of innovation, I was talking to somebody on the phone one day and I said, I just don't get how people can struggle to come up with ideas. All they have to do is XYZ. I'm like, I do it 90 times a minute, probably. If I died today, I would have 5 lifetimes worth of ideas like you to go through. And they said, well, if you can just unpack what you just said and teach that in a process, that's what people need to do. And it's a 5-step process. And essentially what I teach people is what is it that you see that inspires you, that gets you excited, that you love to do, your own personal passion? What do you see about the details in that? And what are the patterns that you see that are universal that you can now start to relate into the work that you do and then generate those ideas? And then you need a formula to pitch them, which interestingly is just following the process to get to the idea that creates your pitch for what I've done, because bad pitches kill great ideas. But the most common thing I hear after I teach people the process is, I now believe that I can be that idea person.
That's so interesting. I mean, that's a real transfer. That's a career transformation, a life transformation. And I can do this. I would also think it's kind of a litmus test for somebody is, should I stay in this organization? Are they going to be open to a new way of thinking, a new operational paradigm for me? And also for somebody who's seeking a new job, to start to ask those questions from that innovator's mindset to determine, is this a company that's just, well, we've always done it this way, we have our product, or a company that's really open to new ideas?
Yeah, and there's a couple simple litmus tests that you can do to find this out. Like one of them, if you want to know inside your organization, how free and kind of empowered do people feel to bring their ideas to the table, to be an innovator? Ask them this question blindly across your team or department. Does my boss support my ideas? And I tell you, and the answer to that one question tells you a whole lot about the culture of that team or that department, even that company.
Right.
Because if people come to work every day and don't feel that their ideas are supported, their ideas stop. And when people's ideas stop, their engagement stops. So when leaders say, well, innovation is this group's responsibility and everybody else butt out and just do the thing you're supposed to do, you're essentially telling them, don't pay attention to your work. Don't be engaged. Don't get excited. Don't come to us with potential ideas that can solve problems, that can help customers. That's the 90% that you really do want to activate. The other thing that I suggest is keep a spreadsheet, super simple spreadsheet. How many ideas have people submitted? How many of those have gone into progress, like you've started to execute them? And then how many of those have actually gone across the finish line? Right. So these 3 tallies tell you a couple of things. One, are people coming forward to share their ideas? And if they're not, why aren't they? Do they don't feel that they'll be heard? Do they don't have the skills to really develop the ideas? Are they not engaged in seeing these opportunities? Then the next one, how many go into, begin execution? And if you have a lot of ideas, but very few go into execution, is it because they weren't really great ideas to start with? Do you need to train people on what a great idea looks like, what an opportunity looks like, where you should really apply these ideas, how to be better at coming up with the ideas? Or is it that you really don't have that leadership support to move ideas into execution? So it all leaves clues. And then how many actually get across the finish line? Now we know this is going to be broad down to very narrow. And sometimes the things that keep it from going across the finish line are things that are kind of beyond your control, like a pandemic or a hard turn in your industry, that you couldn't imagine, or something like that. But if you're not consistently seeing ideas get across the finish line, that really affects people's internal feeling of, I make progress every day when I come to work. And when people are able to share their ideas and be a part of executing and then finishing them, man, that's just like that's the biggest high that you can ever get, because then they have something that they can point to. Everybody else says, I see that my ideas can make a difference in the outcome of what happens, and that gets them excited.
Well, I think there's that for sure, but you also alluded to something earlier about how receptive is your boss to the ideas. Going back to, Suzanne and I, one of the things she says to me a lot, she's like, I'm fascinated by the way your brain works. And I'm like, well, sometimes my brain drives me crazy. But you also mentioned the execution piece. I'll be the first one to say, I can, like you said, I can piece together information, come up with an idea, and see it so clearly. Filling in the blanks, she's much better at it than I am, right?
Mhm.
So practical application and get it, and that's where we have that discussion when an idea sticks that I can't get rid of. She'll start asking questions. What I've learned is the questions aren't a way to kind of push me down. The questions are a way to say, could we make this idea better? Is there more to this idea that maybe you didn't think because you're moving so fast? You went from seed to big product. There's a lot of steps. So what role does that execution mindset, that more pragmatic mindset play in innovation?
Oh, it's huge. And we've all heard people say ideas are the easy part, execution is the hard part. But I have a little corollary to that. I say any idea might be easy, but every idea is hard to execute if it's not a good idea. And I think a lot of reasons why ideas can be hard to execute and are such a struggle is because they weren't the right idea to start with. And that's why we need to teach people the skill of understanding what a good idea is, how to apply it. Like, what's the objective that we're trying to accomplish because of this idea? And being able to tie an idea to a specific business need is huge. And you've been in a leadership position in a lot of different companies of a lot of sizes, and even with your clients, you hear a lot of ideas and you're like, that means nothing to me, right?
Right.
There's yeah, there's like, it is technically an idea, but
Yep.
it doesn't apply to anything that we need or priorities that we have as an organization. So that's the other part that I teach people is how do we identify the most pressing problems, challenges, opportunities, prioritize them, and now we develop the ideas in order to address that.
Okay, I love it. So tying that innovation to a business outcome.
Absolutely. Otherwise, I mean, ideas are a lot of fun. And that's why many times when companies bring in an outsider to help them with like creative thinking and brainstorming and innovation, a lot of ideas come out, but they didn't have a tangible thing that they could be tied to. So they're like balloons that just float away.
Yeah.
And people feel like, man, I spent a whole freaking day in this workshop, and all it means is I'm a day behind, and we have nothing that came out of this that's usable other than, we had some laughs and we like were outside the office and those kind of things. But I'm really big at the end of the day of learning how to think differently and then having rigorous practical applications of how that works. And so when you teach people as individuals these different mindsets of how to think, that scales up to teams, and then that scales up to corporate performance. But back to your question about Suzanne, one of the things that I developed in my research is an archetype assessment about what kind of innovative thinker are you? Because you think differently than me, and I think differently than other people on the team. And instead of that being your biggest hindrance and hurdle and sense of frustration, it's really a superpower, because
Yeah.
Suzanne can ask you questions that, just like you said, it's not to put down your idea, but it's let's really get curious and let's see how we can apply this curiosity in a way that makes this idea better. And you may end up with a completely different idea by the time you're done, but that's part of doing your due diligence
Yeah.
to make sure that that idea is new and great and reliable.
So is curiosity, is that something that's innate that you're born with? Can that even be taught as part of innovation? It seems like they're kind of the same side, two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's research, and here's how I found them to tie together. So there's research that came out in the 1950s. It was by a systems engineer named George Land, and he had been an engineer for much of his career and decided to equipping an engineer to start an agency that taught people how to become creative thinkers. One of his first clients was NASA, which is, a company you may have heard of from at one time or another.
They're going to go places.
Came to him and said, we know we have creative engineers. We just can't figure out which ones they are. So George developed this assessment tool that they launched at NASA that identified these creative thinking engineers so that they could do the work that they wanted to bring out higher creativity and whatever their goal was. Now, as George was thinking about this after the fact, he said, if you look at a 5-year-old, there is no shortage of ideas.
Right.
But what happens between the time they're 5 and 50 to make it essentially unrecognizable? And so he took that assessment that he had done for NASA and did it in a different way that made it apply to 5-year-olds. And so he gave this assessment to 1,600 5-year-olds, and 98% of them registered at the genius level of creative thinking. And he said, well, okay, we're still looking for patterns. So he waited 5 years, gave it to them when they were 10. And by that time, they'd been in school for 5 years, and they're kind of shifting into that pre-adolescent age. At that time, their level of creative thinking genius, only 33% registered at that. You follow them to age 15 and it had dropped to 12%. Over the 1 million people, adults he surveyed, it was at 2%.
Oh.
And I think a big reason why it drops so dramatically and so severely is because as kids, our curiosity is boxed and it's put on a shelf because it's inefficient, it's not productive, it's hard to manage. But it's when we look at the people who are able to keep that curiosity alive and fuel their creative thinking and their innovative mindset, they're what we turn around and say, you're a genius. Oh my gosh, we need more of you. It's like, well, then quit killing them between 5 and 50, allow that room for curiosity, because curiosity truly is what fuels creative thinking and an innovator's mindset.
Those stats are staggering. We could do a whole other podcast on the education system. By the way, I don't know if you saw those balloons go up.
I did. I thought you were throwing a party for something I said right there.
No. So if you're only listening to this, go to our YouTube channel and look. It's at about, I don't know, 20 minutes in. You're talking balloons go up. So I have what that was, nothing on our end. And we're just going to keep it in because we're not that far here on the podcast. But I think those stats are staggering. It really does, to me, say a lot about the education system of how we just do rote. Here it is. Because I was told my entire, maybe not my entire, that might be an exaggeration. I was lazy. I didn't care. I was trying to take the easy way out. Interesting, in college, at one point early in my career, I applied for the FBI.
Oh, wow.
They asked me to submit my college transcript. So I get my college transcript long before everything could be done electronically. And I remember opening it and I was like, a 2.7. Surely better than 2.7. Well, what was really interesting is when I looked at my major, which was communications, I had like a 3.5. All of the required courses, it was like D minus, D minus, D minus. I did just the bare minimum to get the credits because I didn't care. It ripped me out. I didn't understand. I understood, but to me, to like put all my time and energy into something that all I had to do was pass, I just didn't care. Now, that may not be the greatest attitude, but when it was something that I loved to study, that I loved to apply, I excelled because I was able to create. I was able to do a senior thesis based on what I wanted to do. I was part of a debate team that we could formulate and ideate, and that really energized me. But this, like, memorize these things, take a test, absolutely put a stick in my eye. I'd rather have that than try to do something that way.
Yeah, and like your example, your experience is what happens is when we tell people you need to learn this, rather than saying we need you to be a curious learner.
Sure.
Because the curious learners, that's where they have such a wide range of experiences of, travel, art, music, all the things. And if you think about that idea that creative thinking and innovation is about connecting the dots, all of these things that come out because of your curiosity is really about collecting those dots. And the more dots you have, the more ways you have to connect them. And so that's why, I mean, you're that kind of a person. So that's why you go to your town now where you live and your brain just goes wild because it's like a new place and you've got 10 bajillion dots that are connecting at a zillion times a minute. And you can't shut it down because that's just naturally how you function.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I would say for anybody has that mindset or knows people with that mindset, the ability, you talked about, are my ideas being received? People just want to be heard, especially in corporate USA. So just doesn't mean that every idea is going to come to fruition. But if you allow that, I love that idea of keeping a spreadsheet of just list them out, and then people can say and be bold or at least be honest and say, hey, we're not going to be able to execute all of these, but the ones we do, we want to evangelize, we want to recognize, we want you to take part in what this does for the company. I think something like that is got to be something where people go, that's a place I want to work.
And I was when I was doing research for my book, I interviewed he was chief marketing officer at the time. Now he's the CEO of the company, about their approach to innovation. And he said they shut the entire company down once every 6 months to focus on innovation. Now, the software that they had was in an industry that's something they could do.
Sure.
And so they let all of their clients know. And of course, if there was a big emergency, they would take care of their customers. But they said everybody in the organization is to be a part of Innovation Week. It doesn't matter what you do, like everybody's important because this is about how we as an organization innovate. And so they did like 6 months, they would say, here's a product roadmap, or here's products we want to work on during Innovation Week. Sign up for whatever you think sounds interesting. The next one, they would say, sky's the limit. What do you think we should look at and do? So they switched back and forth between some focus and then something that was more open. And there was they let people choose how they wanted to contribute. So sometimes people would say, I can make really good PowerPoints, or I can tell when I am really good at telling a story. So I can help you tell the story of that idea or something like that. But there was a woman from finance who went to one of these innovation weeks and was on a team with some people from IT. And after the innovation week, she was so inspired. She said, what can I do based on what I just learned last week to innovate my work? And she saw that there was a report that took her 40 manual hours every single week to run. A week, a month, right? I know it just like makes your head explode. And so she took what she learned, she wrote a program, taught herself programming, wrote a program, automated this report. And now instead of 40 hours every month, it's 12 minutes.
Wow.
And so you look at that, that's the 90%, that's the low hanging fruit. She essentially is now able to do 15 months worth of work in 12 months because she was taught to think like an innovator, to have that innovator's mindset. But in even more powerfully is that she's got 39 hours and 48 minutes. That's not crappy, grindy work she has to do every month. That's not soul sucking. I mean, imagine how she felt on those days when she woke up every day to get out of bed, to go to work, to run that report. That's Dunkin' Donuts won't even help that.
Time to make the donuts.
Time to do the report.
Yeah, that dour guy, like, oh crap, I got to get up at 3 a.m.
Yeah. And like that sense of empowerment and excitement of, wow, that was just like the obvious thing I saw. Like, what's next? And then everybody in her department, everybody saw she's not a traditional innovator. There's no number on letter I on her head that says she's an innovator, but she learned how to think innovatively, and she has that mindset, and that's what she did. So you think about the biggest opportunities that we have, and a lot of times in organizations, they're the hurdles. That's something that you do consider as traditional innovation. It's all the hurdles that make it really hard to get that stuff out to market.
Right. Yeah. And I've seen it. I've left organizations because of that when I was client side. And then when you work with clients, you can kind of sniff it out pretty quickly when you start to break things. And it's like, yeah, we can't do that.
Yep. That's not how we do it this way. So back to, how do we encourage that curiosity instead of the judgment about what can and can't be done?
Well, and yeah, I think that's a cultural issue too, right? I love creative thinkers. As a matter of fact, one of the most fun things I've done since we started Digital Exhaust was we wrote the Digital Exhaust DNA. And we have a whole section in there to say every idea is viable. Doesn't mean it's going to be implemented, but we want you to bring your ideas. If you think we have an ability to create a new service line, we want you to bring that to the table. We'll support you. We may even ask you to lead it. And then depending on how it goes, if it starts to create revenue for the company, we want you to share in that because you're the originator of it. Why should we just pocket everything? So, we're trying to foster that. And goes to our contractors, our partners, because we want so many different inputs because we don't know it all, right? We've been for a while, but we want different lines of thinking. And already just in our short tenure, we've had tremendous ideas come to the table of, hey, have you guys thought about this? Or perhaps we could do it this way. And it's like, yeah, let's go for it. Let's see how this works.
Yeah, because they all have different experiences than you do. I have a colleague who in his organization, if people bring an idea to the table and there's a revenue impact, he gives them 10% of what that was, either growth or savings.
Now, Scott Alborough mentioned that the other day of talking about a bounty.
Oh, that's an idea bounty.
Yeah. So how many ideas have led to revenue, and then the person that has it, not only do they have to sign away their IP, but they see no benefit from it other than, hey, great job. Great job, Carla. She came up with this idea and now we're making millions. Why shouldn't they get a bounty for that? I love it.
Absolutely.
When I read that, I was like, we got to incorporate that to help drive that thinking. Another question for you that I'm curious with, what is the tie between innovation and growth? And is innovation necessary for growth?
Well, I absolutely believe it is. And I think like a simple place to start with innovation driving growth is salespeople leave 48% of potential revenue on the table.
Oh, wow.
Right? 48%.
Dive more into that. I'm very
now I've got your attention, right?
Well, you have my attention. Now you really have my attention.
Well, and a lot of it is salespeople learn sales techniques, right? They don't learn how to think in innovative and creative ways to solve and address the challenges and even resistance that customers and prospects give them. Yeah. And so without that ability, especially to be curious and to really dig in, and a lot of times I know I've done it. No, here's why I'm saying no. That's not really why I'm saying no, but that's the one I know will get them off my back.
Right.
If those people were curious to me, like salespeople have the opportunity to be curious to their prospects and existing customers, that's where that real revenue potential lies. But because they aren't, or they try just the sales methodologies that they've been taught, that's what everybody else has been taught. But let's look at how do we really identify the true need that they have?
Right.
Let's understand how to come to them with inspired ideas and pitch them in a way that something that might seem truly reckless or random or out there can now feel safe and kind of exciting to them. And then let's get curious about how we make it work in their organization, or curious about what they see the roadblocks being. And then as we go through the cycle of understanding how to come up with ideas, you need ideas all the way through the process, always, constantly. Yeah. So there's, I think a lot of sales leaders are blind to that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in my head, as you're saying this, I'm thinking about all the prospects that I've talked to. I'm like, okay, should I approach that differently? Right. I mean, ghosting is such a huge thing now in our world today. And, we've even told a few like, hey, we're kind of done chasing you. Like you've shared your needs. We've addressed the problems. But now I'm sitting here going, oh, maybe I should take a different approach.
Yeah. How do we do it a little bit? How do we think differently? How do we rethink that approach and be more innovative thinkers as salespeople even?
So one of my favorite stories I've ever heard you tell was the Barbie story.
Okay.
Remember that?
Yeah. So I do.
I want you to share that because you're going to tell it far better than I do, but I think it encapsulates everything we've talked about. And I hope, I know when I first heard it, I was like, wow, this has to get me to think different, to really start to change the way I'm looking at problems and needs. So I'm going to ask you to share that a little bit, and then kind of how that can apply to probably the general, our general audience of anybody in a B2B growth facing role.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Barbie story is our good friend, Kathy Button-Bell. She was the chief marketing officer for Emerson. So Emerson was an industrial manufacturing company, and they still are. They weren't just used to be industrial manufacturing company in St. Louis, Missouri. And they were going through a big shift. They had sold off parts of the company. They had bought new parts. And one of the things that Kathy was working on was their values to really create one Emerson. Now, I know I've seen 100 times, and I'm guilty of working on these kind of projects where there's a new initiative and the rollout is just a series of videos of the executive on screen talking in a suit, and people kind of roll their eyes and say, yeah, whatever. So what Kathy was really observing in all of this is, what do we always do? A lot like salespeople do. What do we always do? What's our checklist? And what could be something completely different? And she is somebody who's highly, highly observant of trends that have nothing to do with industrial manufacturing or business or whatever. She happened to be watching YouTube videos one night, highly observant. She comes across this Barbie video. And it isn't just about little girls playing with Barbies, but it's dads who play with Barbies. And it's that you can do a search for it on YouTube. It's just the sweetest thing, dads who play with Barbies. And it goes through this story of how, dads have their guy time and their gruff and their sports and their all these things, but now they make time for a little Barbie time because that's what their daughters want to play. And they have discovered this whole new world because of this shift in these little girls teaching them as dads how to look at the world and what's possible. So you think about, like, oh, a Barbie, awesome. But you would never think, oh, we need to be like Barbie. If you're a $25 million, 125-year-old industrial manufacturing company in St. Louis, Missouri, you don't say, we need to be more like Barbie. Like, that's an example of the kind of craziness that can happen sometimes when you push things too far. But what Kathy did is she looked at all of these things that she observed about how it's traditionally done and what Barbie did. And she said, it's really about a pattern of connection. And it's a pattern of flipping the script on how we see the world in which we live. And so it was those patterns that she then related into the work that she was doing at Emerson. And this relating step is actually the hardest to do, to come up with these ideas, but it's the magic step. And it's also, when you get it right, it de-risks ideas that you bring into the organization based on something else you see outside in the world that can see totally crazy. And so she said, really what we're relating into this is, how do we tell a story of one Emerson in a way that surprises and delights people? And that is what fueled their idea generation, their brainstorming part. But what most people do is they say, oh, we need a new idea to launch our new values campaign. Get into a room on a Zoom call. Let's get all the ideas, and no such thing as a bad idea. And a lot of them are really horrible ideas. But because Kathy is one of those natural innovators, she understands you have to prime that pump.
Yeah.
And she understands that way of thinking to bring in outside inspiration. So what they did, instead of having that talking head, they had the children of Emerson employees from around the world share the story of what the new values meant to them as kids. Now, this did a couple of things. One, there's no complicated script.
Right.
Kids just say things like they are, and it's pure and it's sweet and it's innocent and it's real. And the other thing that it did is that it helped parents and also the people who work with these parents and others as parents identify what I say and the values that I teach my child really matter. And they were hearing these kids tell back the story and the importance of the same value that they had taught their kids that now mattered to them as an Emerson employee. And so there was an incredibly strong bond between what I value and is important for me to teach and have as a legacy with my children are the same values that Emerson has as my employer. And you talk about the disconnect with employees and what's going on and ghosting with hiring. I think ghosting with employers and how they treat people. When you can create that really strong emotional bond around we share the same values, that's just rocket fuel to an organization.
Yeah. I've always loved that story. I think it's so powerful. I will say my girl one of my favorite videos, I think she was 3 or 4, is of her painting my nails.
Oh,
And with
that's so sweet.
every brush stroke, just giggling. But yeah, little girls can get their dads to, even now she's 24. And if they really want something, the boys and my wife, they're like, Lauren, go
Go,
call
go
them.
ask dad. Yeah.
So
Now you look at like Kathy understood how to relate that. Now she just came to the executive team and said, Barbie's super successful. We need to be more like Barbie. They'd go, are you nuts? Because there's no relationship, but she was able to methodically connect those dots. Back to our earlier conversation.
well, and I'm sure she was able to say, if we can do this, this is going to be the business benefit and the outcome.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I think that's such a powerful demonstration and a really great way to wrap the entire, and we could talk for a whole lot longer. Maybe we'll have to have you back on to
Yeah.
continue the discussion. So
Well, and it is like you think about what that means to customers, to prospects, to shareholders, to analysts.
yeah,
All of a sudden, it's a whole fresh company.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your thoughts and your wisdom. I love the research. You've got my wheels spinning in terms of how we're talking to our prospects and things like that. It's always good. I would highly suggest we'll put a link to this book in the show notes. We'll try to find that Barbie video as well. Put
Yep.
that, and then also all your contact details in the show notes. Want to thank all of you for listening or watching Growthology, and we want to thank Carla for being part of the Growthology community. Everybody out there in a growth facing role, be innovative, be curious, and make it a great day.